Are we online?
No.
Oh, let me change my internet. In hall. So according to my screen, I'm online. I see video and audio.
Yes.
There we go. Just took some time. Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. Yes? So it'll be good to turn the volume down so it doesn't totally confuse me.
I just brought it.
Okay, thank you.
Just to check.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Thank you for teaching.
So, second class on joyful effort. Maybe more joyful than our last class. We can hope. So by way of review, okay, we can do the prayers. Tibetan. Okay, do you want to start? You want to be our umse?
Sashi
Puki Jukshi Meto Tram Vira Blinshin Nimbe Yumpali Sange Shindu Mikte Wadi Drokun Namda Shingai Tripasho Irangul Ratnamandala Kamiliyatayam
Sangye
Chudang Soki Chognamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyengi Pe Sunamki Drola Penshir Sangye Rupasho
Sangye
Chudang Soki Chognamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyengi Pe Sonamki Drola Penshir Sangye Rupasho
Sangye
Chudang Soki Chognamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyengi Pe Sonamki Drola Penshir Sangye Rupasho. Okay. So, without wind, nothing flickers. Remember from last class? Do you remember what that meant?
Without effort, you can't get enough.
And do you remember how the joyful effort relates to the other perfections? The first, sorry, go ahead.
It's the main thing. It's like the fuel.
The fuel, it's the fuel for the other perfections. So the first three perfections, which are generosity or giving, an ethical life, and the practice of patience, all of those relate.
Create physical body of the Buddha.
Create the physical body of the Buddha, right? And the last two, the last two, wisdom is the last one, meditation and wisdom, or concentration and wisdom, create the mind of a Buddha. And joyful effort sits right in the middle and affects all of them. Without that joy in doing good things, the joy in practice, you wouldn't do any of the other things, right? So the definition of joyful effort is taking joy in doing good. Right? And then we went into 3 things that stop effort, stop joyful effort. The first one was lelo, or laziness, right? Which they said was attraction to indulging in worldly pleasures, or to lazing around, or not getting fed up with cyclic existence, right? If you don't get tired of life, you'll tend to be lazy about doing the practices. And then the second one was being attracted to wrong deeds, right? And in here they included things like unwholesome activities, which they say are like television, movies, drinking, getting on Facebook, you know, things that will suck up your time so that you won't have time for doing your practices. You know? And they take away that enthusiasm for practicing. So in there we got into the unjoyful part, which was the the experiences that will happen at the point of death. You know, that many of us believe we've got plenty of time left, and we don't really know what that experience of dying is. And when we get there, you know, you're totally unable to concentrate. Your mind, as it starts to disintegrate, your brain disintegrates and the synapses get all weird. You hallucinate, right? You can't concentrate. You hear the terrible sounds of the hell realms, or of all the scary things in your own life, you know. You'll see your life pass before you, and you'll see all of the ways in which you've hurt people in your life. Excruciatingly painful. So they say practice now, you know, do it now so that when you get there, your mind is strong enough to see you through. And then the third one, which stops effort, was discouragement. Right? And that's what we're going to talk about in this class. So maybe it's not going to be so joyful. But really, it's about how to avoid discouragement. It's actually quite encouraging. It's about the fact that we all have this nature in us that will take us to enlightenment eventually. You know? So discouragement is that feeling like you'll never be able to make it. You know, you're never going to get there. That we hear about all of these wonderful actions that bodhisattvas do, and we think we're never going to be able to do it. You know, it's hard enough to give a little bit away, you know, to take something that you care about and to give it to somebody else. You know, how are we ever going to be able to give an eye or give a kidney or something like that, or a piece of flesh to someone, you know? So we get discouraged, and then we think we're just not going to do it, you know. It takes away our enthusiasm. So we're going to talk about these 4 armies of the king, they call it, these 4 armies that can help us, these 4 things which will help us when we begin to feel discouraged. So contemplation 9 is called the armies of the king. So if you'll close your eyes and just listen. Never feel discouraged. Assemble the forces. Engage yourself gladly. Come to find complete command of yourself. See yourself and other people as equal. And finally, exchange yourself and others as well. So we're going to talk about these 4 forces or 4 armies which bodhisattvas have at their disposal, which will help us to fight the mental afflictions and prevent us from getting discouraged. So they say bodhisattvas are kind of like the kings of old times, you know, or like the president of the United States, who they have at their command, you know, armies. They've got the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force. You know, these are all forces which are there to help them be able to do what they want to do in the world. Back in ancient India, they had the elephanteers, you know, the ones that rode elephants into the armies, and charioteers, and then the horsemen, you know. So what would these forces be that bodhisattvas use to help them not get discouraged? The first one is a bodhisattva attitude. The second is working hard at the 2 collections. And I'm going to go into them, but I'm just going to list them for you here to start with. The third is throwing yourself into it. And the fourth is ready to work. So what would a bodhisattva attitude be? Since we've got so many bodhisattvas in the room.
I want to become enlightened.
Want to become enlightened for the sake of every being, right? So the idea is that this wish to become enlightened for other people, this compassion that you hold in your heart, is going to be a wonderful tool for helping you not get angry, you know, for helping you do good deeds and be really ethical in your actions because you don't want to be hurting other people, right? It's going to really help you with giving, because you will feel compassion for people and you will want to make them happy. You will want to give them the things that they want and the things that they need. So they talk about compassion as armor that you wear. You know, if your compassion gets strong enough, it will overcome those other negative afflictions. You know, it will overcome anger. It will overcome fear. It will overcome jealousy. So it's like you have a spiritual armor or a psychic armor which helps you. And they say when you do things like go into long-term retreat, you will like get up in the morning and the first thing you do is to say these prayers of compassion. You will remind yourself of your bodhisattva attitude, and that will help keep those enemies from seeping into your meditations. You know, you remind yourself. So this armor of compassion has a dual effect. It keeps whatever progress you've already made from slipping away, and it prevents negativities from coming in. You know, the minute the negativities come in and you remind yourself of your compassion, it stops them, right? So if you think about it, it's impossible to get angry if you're feeling compassion in your heart. You know, if you have love in your heart and compassion, that anger can't make its way in there. There's no room for it. So they say in retreat that there are special obstacles. Right? So in the morning you do your prayers and you remind yourself of your compassion, and it diverts those obstacles. And in the higher teachings, there are special practices for keeping the good thoughts from leaking out and keeping the bad thoughts from seeping in. You have a question? I don't know what those, yeah.
It all sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. So we all know that bodhisattva actions are sometimes not very easy to do, right? I mean, sometimes it's really easy to be giving and loving and compassionate, and other times it's really not, when somebody has really made you angry or really irritated you,
Or if you forget about it.
or if you forget about it. That's coming up in a little bit. But if you remind yourself and you pray for all others to be happy, you know, it's going to keep you from getting upset. That reminding yourself, that bringing the compassion and the prayer in. But we all know too that we can get up in the morning and we can say our prayers and we can think loving thoughts and we can fill ourselves with beautiful light and love, and then walk out the door and meet someone and it disappears in a flash. Yeah. So recollecting becomes very important. And then when that happens, you know, when you lose it, it can be really, really discouraging. You know, you think to yourself, God, I get up every morning and I say these prayers and look at me, I can't do it. You know, the minute somebody yells at me, I'm lost, you know. So it's important to keep reminding yourself. And, you know, it's interesting, we think, I mean, I sometimes think, you know, what is this Bodhisattva attitude all about? Why are we learning this great love and compassion and action? And this is certainly one of the strong motivators for that, right? Because of how it will help you stay focused and keep you from creating the negative karmas that are going to make you miserable, you know, and keep you creating those good karmas that are going to bring you to enlightenment, bring you to a much happier life. Okay. So the Bodhisattva attitude was number one. And number two in the armies is working hard at the two collections. Anybody know what the two collections are?
Mm-mm.
Merit and wisdom. They're in the prayers that we say every day. Yep. So they call this one engaged effort or working effort. You know, when we talked about effort as a perfection, it's joy in doing good, right? It's not really what we normally think of as effort, but this one is what we normally think of as effort. This one is getting up and doing your practices and doing your prayers, doing all of those things. And going out, and sometimes it's not easy to do good things, you know, so it takes effort to do that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat two connections?
Merit and wisdom. Merit creates the bodies of a Buddha, and wisdom creates the mind of the Buddha. Mm-hmm. So when we practice the first three perfections, we're working on the collection of merit. And when we practice the last two, it's the collections of wisdom. Number three, throwing yourself into it. So this one is about working hard at recollection and awareness. And the class on meditation goes pretty deeply into this idea of recollection and awareness. It's Drempa and Sheshin. There's certain Buddhist words I like Lelo is one of them, and Sheshin, I like Sheshin. So this talks about how much are you present, you know, how much time during your day do you stay present and aware of what you're doing and aware of what's important to you and aware of what you're practicing, you know. So Drempa, or presence or recollection, is all about being here now, about knowing what it is you're doing in the moment that you're doing it, you know. So we get up in the morning and we think, we do prayers and we think, I'm going to go through my day and I'm going to do these wonderful bodhisattva actions. And then you get caught up in whatever you're doing for work, or, and you don't think about it, and someone comes along and they say something to you and you're no longer thinking that you're practicing, and so you get upset. Right? So recollection, remembering what it is that you're doing, is very important. And Geshe says, once you become a bodhisattva, your work, you go to work and your work might be fixing things. It might be operations at Diamond Mountain facilities where you're going to go and fix the plumbing or take care of the heat or something, or hospitality like we do here. It might be working in a bank, whatever it is, that's what you're doing. And that's how you're making money. But your real career is your bodhisattva practices. And whether you can remember that during the day when you're out there working on these things, if your real career is making yourself and others happy, how much can you remember that throughout your day while you're doing whatever it is that you're doing? If you're snorkeling on vacation or water skiing or working in your office, can you remember your practices? In meditation, it's keeping your mind on your object, right? Recollecting your object. When you're in meditation and you're trying to be single-pointed on an object and your mind begins to wander, you've lost your recollection, right? You've lost your focus, right? So yeah, there was the story. Remember, I told the story about the yogi in the cave, and it was Patrul Rinpoche who came along. There's another story Geshe tells. He says it's a very common story in Tibetan Buddhism, where there's a yogi sitting by the side of the road meditating, as they often did in India, And so some guy comes up, sees him meditating, goes over and taps him on the shoulder, Hey, what you doing? The guy says, I'm meditating. He says, oh, yeah, so that's cool, yeah, what you meditating on? And he says, I'm meditating on patience, The guy says, hey, that's great, but really, you're not really doing that, you're just pretending, you're not, pretty soon the man who's been sitting there meditating starts to get more and more irritated and angry at this guy who's disturbing his meditation. Can't you see I'm meditating? And he begins yelling. They say he has lost his recollection, right? He forgot what it was that he was doing. He got distracted by that person. Geshe used he said the guy calls him a bad name, and then he goes and uses that bad name. I said, well, maybe he called him an idiot, Anyway, he lost his recollection. Right? And so then the other important factor is awareness, right? So we're supposed to be remembering throughout our day what it is we're doing, so that when somebody says something to us and the irritation begins to arise, we won't get upset. But if we forget, then there's this sheshan, and sheshan is the awareness. And the awareness is like this little watchman in the back of your mind, watchman, He is sitting there just waiting for you to lose your recollection. And the minute you do, he goes, wait a minute, you lost it. Or he rings a little bell, ding, 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 ding. You lost it. And then recollection comes up again and you remember what you're doing. So they say these are two very important forces for those of us who want to be able to focus our minds on doing good deeds, focus our minds in meditation, right? To have recollection and then have awareness, have that watchman. So the more you sit on your cushion and the more you meditate, you get better and better at catching yourself losing it, catching yourself losing your focus and thinking about lunch or what you did last night or the friend you're going to meet later, something like that. Awareness jumps in, tells you you've lost your recollection. Recollection comes back and you focus again. And they say that these two mental functions become very strong in bodhisattvas who have practiced for a long time, in high bodhisattvas, that within milliseconds they can catch their mind beginning to wander. There's a point where you can catch yourself about to have a thought that's going to take you away. In the beginning, you catch yourself after about 1,000 thoughts, and then after a few, it gets down, and then you can feel yourself about to have a thought, you can feel it about to happen, right? So it becomes very refined in high bodhisattvas, It can happen really quickly, and anger won't have a chance to survive, to even get started. So Geshe said it was like the special forces, the special forces who are just waiting on the sideline. And the minute they get a call, it's like zoom, and they're out there taking care of things, right? Your awareness is like that. It can get to be such a fine awareness that it catches it so quickly. Number 4, ready for work. This is the 4th of the armies. Fit for work, or self-command. It's one of your armies when you get to be so good at your meditations, like your mind is fit, like you've been working out, and your mind is really fit and ready to go, that you have command over yourself. You can sit down on your cushion and you can tell your body you're going to sit there for 3 hours. You can tell your mind it's not going to wander, and the mind will listen to you. It'll begin to go and then go and come back. So once you get that kind of command over your body and your mind, it's a strong force in keeping you in line and keeping you from getting discouraged. So the 4 armies were
Ready for work.
Ready for work. Bodhisattva attitude.
Just do it.
I should look. Yeah. Throwing yourself into it.
Working hard.
And working hard at the 2 collections. So bodhisattvas need all of these forces to help them to fight the mental afflictions, to fight discouragement, and to keep you on track. And then the last part of that verse, which he doesn't go into very much here, is that you do these things to reach a point where you can treat other people as you would treat yourself, right? Where you can see other people being as important as you are, equal to yourself. Where your concern about them is equal to your concern about yourself. And then that you're actually able to put their interests ahead of your own, make them more important than yourself. Lojong goes into that. I think it's what, class 14? Goes into putting everyone ahead of you. So Master Shantideva is going to go into that later. He's going to talk about it when he talks about meditation. And Geshe says his chapter on meditation is all about this. And he doesn't actually talk about meditation in his chapter on meditation. He doesn't talk about what you do when you sit on your cushion and how to focus your mind. He talks about exchanging yourself and others, making them equal to you and then making them more important to you and putting yourself in their place in those practices. But that's meditation chapter, so we'll do that later. So then contemplation 10, this is from the Sutra of Sabahu. So a sutra is where the Buddha is speaking, right? It's the Buddha's own words. And it talks about the potential for all of us to reach Buddhahood. So we shouldn't get discouraged, because we all have the potential to get there. So if you want to close your eyes for a minute. Never allow yourself the feeling of being discouraged or having the thought, how could I ever become enlightened? About this, those who have gone thus, the ones who speak the truth, have spoken the following words of truth. Those beings who are flies and gnats, or bees, and even those who live as worms as well, can reach unmatched enlightenment, so difficult to reach, if they develop the force of effort. So someone like me, someone born as a member of humankind, can tell what helps or hurts. We have intelligence. Assuming then that I never give up the Bodhisattva way of life, why shouldn't I reach enlightenment? So we were talking about flies and gnats today. It's one of the things that we deal with at Diamond Mountain. So even flies and gnats have the potential for Buddhahood. Even flies and gnats have the potential to become a person or to become a being with a mind that can see everything all at once and a body that can emanate anywhere. Then why shouldn't we, who have intelligence, who can think about things, who can reflect upon things, we have so much more ability to understand these things, at least as far as we know. We can discriminate things and we can critically think. We are so lucky in that way, Why should we think we couldn't become enlightened? If flies and gnats can do it, we certainly can do it. So we're going to go into the topic of Buddha nature, because Buddha nature is what basically guarantees that we can become enlightened, that we can change into something other than who we are now, that our minds and our bodies can change. So it's a fairly long topic. Do you want to take a break now? We could break in the middle of it as well. We haven't gone for that long. Anyone ready for a break? You good? All right. So I'll ask again, we might stop in the middle of this topic, but if you need a break, you can raise your hand or you can just get up and go. Yeah. So Buddha nature. What is Buddha nature? This topic is covered in Maitreya's Abhisamaya Alamkara. That's another one of those words that, I'm so glad I can say it. So Buddha nature is that potential that we all have to become enlightened. Right? And I've heard it talked about in different ways. One of them is that there's this little Buddha inside you, right? And it's just covered over by all of these mental afflictions, by all of these things. And all we have to do is get rid of those mental afflictions, and then Buddha will be there, you know. And I don't know, in some ways it almost seems true, because what we're working on is getting rid of all of our mental afflictions. And once we do that, we reach nirvana, right? But there is no little Buddha sitting inside us waiting to get enlightened. The truth of it is that it's that whole concept of emptiness, right? It's that our Buddha nature is the fact that we are not self-existent. You know, it's the fact that we can change, right? Our mind can change, our bodies can change. They're doing it all the time, right? So like this arm of mine, or my glasses, are constantly in flux, right? They're constantly changing. And we went through this before. They're not self-existent. They don't exist out here separate from each of us perceiving them as what they are, right? The fact that they're not self-existent is what makes it possible for it to change, right? If it were self-existent, it would stay exactly like this all the time, you know? But we all go around thinking that everything is self-existent. We think that if I put my pen down here and I walk out of the room, the pen's sitting there on the floor and it's going to be there when I come back, right? That's the way we all think about everything, right? That it's not there dependent upon me seeing it, that it's there, it's real and it's there. But what Buddhism teaches is that that's not true, you know, that there may be colors and shapes out there, there may be that sort of thing out there, but without our perceiving it, it isn't a pen, right? Without our perceiving it, it's not self-existent, it's not there. Yeah. See. So this Buddha nature, the definition of Buddha nature is anything that could turn into a Buddha. When we say Buddha, what do we think about? Do we think about this person who lived 2,500 years ago, who was born a prince and left the palace and, you know, starved himself and meditated a lot and sat under a tree? You know, that's what the nominal Buddha. But what is a Buddha really? Right? So we should think about two things when we think about Buddha, right? So there's the nominal and there's the ultimate, and we talked about that in terms of the nominal Dharma and the ultimate Dharma, the nominal Sangha and the ultimate Sangha. So what Buddha really is a mind that is omniscient, that can see all things in all times, all at once. Like in his mind at any moment exists all things in all times, right? His mind is filled with infinite compassion and infinite love, right? So Buddha isn't a person, but it's a state of mind. And it's a state of mind that any one of us can achieve if we work at it, right? And then Buddha is also a body that can emanate as anything at any moment spontaneously. So they say the moment you reach enlightenment, like just a second or so afterwards, spontaneously, a Buddha is able to emanate bodies any place, anytime, anywhere. Doesn't have to think about it, it just happens. Where do you think that would have come from? From being generous. Mm-hmm. And from that wish to bring all people to happiness. that wish to help all beings, right? So you create then this body that will spontaneously help all beings. So imagine what that might be like if our minds were able to do that. You know, if our minds were able to be that full of love and compassion, that we could emanate love and compassion to every being everywhere that ever existed or ever will exist. I think it's a kind of love none of us can really comprehend, you know, a kind of happiness, a kind of bliss. You know. So Buddha nature is anything that could turn into a Buddha. So what could turn into a Buddha? Could my pen be a Buddha? Or my backpack? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They say you have to have a mind, right? So we're going to talk about two kinds of Buddha nature. And the first one is called inborn Buddha nature. Right?
Which Buddha nature? Which one?
Inborn, I-N-B-O-R-N, inborn Buddha nature. It exists in you by nature. The moment you're born, you have Buddha nature. Mm-hmm. And basically, it's the emptiness of your mind, right? They call inborn Buddha nature. The fact that your mind could be anything, the fact that your mind is not self-existent, is your inborn Buddha nature. So they say that their traditional example is a seed in the mind of an old scrounging mutt, right? I mean, in some ways, it's like the gnats and the flies, you know. There's a seed in the mind of anyone who's got a mind, which is, you know, that seed is the emptiness of their mind. And that is the potential for that mind to be able to change, you know, the potential for it to be anything. So a self-existent thing, that thing that exists out there separate from our perceiving it, doesn't exist. It never did exist. It never will exist, right? And the example that we hear all the time is the three-headed purple elephant. Is there a three-headed purple elephant in this room? You know, no. We could say, is there an elephant in this room? You know, that's something that possibly could exist. It just doesn't exist in this room at this time. But when you say a three-headed purple elephant in this room, that's something that never could have existed. It never will exist. You know, it doesn't exist here right now. And that's that concept of self-existence. It never was, it never will be, it never could be. Something could never exist that way, separate from our perceiving it, unchanging, self-existent. It just can't exist that way. So let's think about that, right? If the pen is here and I'm looking at it, how do I get that it's a pen? Right? What is it that my eye, we can say there's colors and shapes, and those colors and shapes are coming into my eye. What happens to it then? What is it that the eye is actually doing, right? There's the back part of your eye that, you know, the colors and shapes, the light is touching, and that sends a signal back into your brain. But it isn't a pen until the brain, the mind, sees it as a pen. The mind then says, oh yeah, these colors and shapes, that's a pen, right? So where did the mind get that idea, you know? It's not the eye that's seeing a pen, you know, it's the eye that's picking up colors and shapes, and we are saying pen. How do we, you know, how did that happen?
Yeah. My mom taught me that it is a pen.
That it's a pen.
So why now?
Yeah. So there was an impression put in your mind when you were a child.
Impression in my mind.
The dog's mom didn't do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the dog has a different impression of what it is that's there. Right? So based on that data that the mind is getting from the eyeball or from any of our other senses, from the ears, based on that data, you know, the mind makes an interpretation. The mind then makes a picture, and it's actually that picture that we're seeing. It's not actually a pen outside here that we're seeing. We're seeing this little picture that our mind makes out of that sensory data that's put in there. So they say that the mind is very fluid and very plastic, right? It can change, and we can change it, and we can make it give us different impressions, right? But how do we do that? So they say, could the mind have seen something else? Yeah. No. I mean, different minds see different things. You know? Did I tell the story in one of the classes about this article that I read about a law school? And they had their students come into a courtroom, supposedly to watch this trial. And then they staged this event where a man came walking down the aisle and he got into a fight with someone, and the guards came rushing over and grabbed him and rushed him out of the courtroom. And then they asked all of the law students, please to write down, without talking to each other, write down their, you know, description of the event that had happened. And every one of them saw something different. You know, nobody had seen the same thing, right? And this was an experiment to say that an eyewitness account cannot be trusted, right? People see different things, you know. Once I started watching for that, like keeping that in the back of my mind, there were things like one of the kids came in the room and something happened between them and the dog, you know, and my daughter said, did you see her try to bite the dog? And what I saw was her try to kiss the dog, you know, so we both saw totally different things, right? So did it exist out there? You know?
No.
Yeah. What happened in the courtroom, did it exist out there when everybody saw something different? I don't know how many times I've walked away from a conversation and come back later to find out the person heard something totally different than I thought I said, you know, or we thought we made an agreement, but they heard something else than what I said. And so, you know, I have that karma a lot, you know, that in any event, you go to a movie with someone and what is it they see in the movie compared to what you see in the movie, you know. So is it out there? Is it self-existently out there? Or are we all seeing different things when we think we're seeing the same thing? You know? I remember back in college, I think it was a Psych 101 class or something, and they projected on the wall a picture and they said, what do you see there? You know, and some people saw a number written in there and some people didn't, right? And they basically were saying, you know, this is to show you what color blindness is or something. So we think we're all perceiving the same thing, but we all have different instruments of perception that are picking up different things, and we all have different minds that are taking any of those perceptions and turning them into whatever we think we're experiencing. Right? That's the emptiness of our minds, right? That's the fact that our minds can experience anything. So where that comes from, which most of us have heard in the past, is that everything that we do or think or say makes an imprint in our mind. And that imprint remains there until at some point, causes and conditions arise, and we project onto those causes and conditions whatever the seed was that we planted in our minds. So then Geshe says, okay, I see this arm here. What I'm seeing is a human arm, right? But that's impressions coming from my mind projected onto these colors and shapes out here. And it can change. It does change. When it was a younger arm, it looked very different than now. And now it has what appears to be a red spot on it. Didn't have that yesterday, right? So it's this constantly changing projection, right? And it could shift to be a dog's arm, and because it's perceptions shooting out of our mind at 64 per finger snap. I thought about that the other day. If a finger snap were a second and there were 64 karmic seeds arising in a second, then in a minute, you'd have 36,000 or 38,500 karmic seeds would have arisen. In 10 minutes, it's 38,000 karmic seeds have arisen, right? And that's happening so fast that we can't see it. A movie projector is still photos. Did you ever, as a kid, take a bunch of pictures and flip through them like this and it looks like something moving? Movie projector does that, and that's what our minds are doing. Right? So every impression that we make comes out again at some point, right? It arises again at some point. It exists there in our minds. So if we make these wonderful, beautiful, sweet little impressions, they're going to arise as wonderful, beautiful, sweet things in our lives. And if we make these nasty, angry, jealous, fearful impressions, that's what's going to begin to arise in our lives. Those impressions will come back out and project themselves onto what we think of as reality out there. Right? So could we decide to have better mental images? Like you go into the dentist's, could you decide, I'm not going to have cavities today, or I'm not going to feel this pain? We can't do that, right? In the moment, we can't wish it away. I got pretty good at kind of separating myself a little bit from the pain. It's almost like going, nah, nah, nah. I'm not going to feel this. I'm not going to hear this. But we can't make it not happen in the moment, right? The only thing that we can do are plant those seeds to have it better in the future. Right? And if you take the class on karma, you'll learn about how karma grows. Karma's definite. You can't plant a watermelon seed and expect a tomato to grow. If you plant a nasty little seed, something nasty is going to grow. So he says, karma is mental impressions that are created by the moral content of everything that we do, think, or say. I like the way that was expressed. They're created by the moral content. If you serve others, your impressions are very sweet and very powerful. And if you hurt others, your impressions are very ugly and dangerous and powerful. So he says the level of your ethical behavior, what your thoughts are what force you to perceive yourself as either a Buddha or as a suffering being. And we've all created some suffering being karmas, right? So it's also true that these impressions take time to grow. And he said one of the problems is that, you can step on an ant and your body doesn't get crushed immediately, right? So you don't know that there's a correlation there between crushing an ant and being crushed yourself, right? That there's time, it takes time. There's time lapse between the planting of the seed and the emerging of that seed. They say that that time can get faster and faster and faster depending on how you're focusing your mind. And the people that were in 3-year retreat here began to see karmas arising really quickly after they were planted. But most of the time it takes quite a while. So he talks about what they do in the debate ground with this concept. He says, someone would say, can the eye or the eyeball see an arm? Does the eyeball see an arm? The answer is no. The eyeball picks up colors and shapes, and those colors make an impression on the, what do they call that, the back of the eye? I don't remember. So what is it that creates the arm?
Retina.
The retina. Right. Yeah, the back of the eyeball is the retina, so the colors make an impression on the retina, which then sends a signal, right? So what is creating arm, that concept of arm? If the eye isn't doing it, what is doing it?
Mind.
The mind is doing it. So arm is a mental thing, right? Arm isn't something out there. Arm is a mental thing. It's a picture in your mind. Is it a matter of choice? So that's the way they take it through a logical progression. It's not willpower, it's karma, right? So when you move your arm, you think that the arm is moving, right? You think the arm is changing. But what they say is that, all of those, what is it? I said 3,600 in a minute, right? So my arm, 3,600 mental impressions give me the impression that my arm is moving. But really what it is all these different mental images coming out. And I think I see an arm moving. This is pretty hard to wrap your mind around, right? So there's a changing perception that is happening, right? I mean, even if you thought the arm was doing this, like, how is that perception of the arm doing that happening? Right? It's all these many, 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 many little mental images perceiving it. And why is it that all of you would agree with me that my arm just moved? Is it because there's really an arm out here that's moving?
Because we have the same karma.
Yeah, because we have the same or similar karma. Yeah, and I say similar because your perception of the arm moving may be different than my perception of the arm moving. But we have all created a similar karma, so we all perceive sitting in this room, and we all perceive the arm moving, and we all perceive the tanka behind me. Maybe. Do you?
How do you know?
How do you know? Yeah. And you know that there are people, right, whose minds might be perceiving little bugs crawling all over themselves while you're sitting there and you don't see any bug crawling on them. We've all heard of people who seem to be crazy, who are perceiving things very differently than we are perceiving things, right? And it's that they have a different karma. For them, it's 100% real, you know. For us, it's not. So we're talking about Buddha nature. And this whole idea of the emptiness of things is the innate Buddha nature. It's the emptiness of your mind. And they say that that's the only part of you that will remain the same when you go through this transition of becoming a Buddha. The emptiness of the Buddha's mind is exactly the same as the emptiness of your mind. So that'll be the same, but your mind and your body will shift so amazingly, right? So the second Buddha nature is that Buddha nature which requires development. Does anyone want to take a break? Sure? Okay, we'll take a break here for 5 minutes or so. And then we'll talk about the Buddha nature that requires development. I'm talking too fast.
No, it's okay. And now I understand more than usually. Because something opened in my mind.
Because you're helping others to understand.
I helped others to understand before, but it wasn't opened.
It just took longer.
Yeah.
It took more to see.
I have pain in my kidney. Third day.
I think I have some cranberry capsules somebody gave me. I can give you.
Thank you.
I have cranberry juice, but it's probably too old. Capsules.
Drink.
Me also, I don't drink because it's getting colder, so I don't want to drink during the day.
Lose water. You don't lose water.
Not as much, but it's still very, very dry environment. So it's not your back. It's
this with the hands and always say hands and hands. Problem is with that. So I work with my mind if I'm doing it. I was reading Smar's book. I was thinking of bringing it down and making some quotes from it. And there this one woman said she planted tomatoes and she recommended, and they were covered with those hornworms, those worms that eat tomato plants. And her first impulse was to, of course, take them off, probably kill them. And she decided, no, she wasn't going to do that this time. And she just offered them the plant. And they ate like all the leaves off the plants. But then the leaves started growing again. And the plants got really strong and healthy, and she had a great crop. And it happened that she heard from many of her friends that the worms were so bad, that they need to use them. She was the only one of her friends that had to meet. Yes, it is a problem. We don't want. There was one day I said I was running into ocean areas because it became sunset. The mosquitoes came in, and they started swarming around. And I had been thinking a lot about how, mosquitoes, they're just hungry, looking for some food, and I have been, eating chickens, about to eat a turkey, so why should I deny them their meal? It's not even going to kill me. So I sat there and I let one of them come down on my arm. I was totally aware of it, stunning, and I let him, I watched him fill up and gorge and fly away and watched him go. And then all the other mosquitoes left me alone for that day. Next day, they were all over. But that day, when I just purposely do that, no mosquitoes with me.
Friends always say, oh, you make a so yes, they always tell me, those are the mothers. It's just a female who sound blood because they need for the child. Those are the mothers. Have so much blood.
Do you get any welts when you itch? Yeah, I didn't get any welts from that. But as a kid, I would get covered with bites on my arm.
I had a bead off my arm when I was riding.
But I squished it.
I couldn't not squish it. I didn't want to wait forward. I thought I was wondering what the karma was that it was on me. I would fall to air. Went right up my stomach.
I had a day recently, and like this doesn't happen, but on this day, some big flying insect came and hit me on the face. And like 10 minutes later, another one smashed me here. And like a few hours later, another one hit me in the head. It's like, so probably 10 times that day, some big insect smashed into me. And then it stopped. It hasn't. It was interesting.
I try to save them most of the time, so I think
I don't get bitten, but I guess so many maybe like I killed. Like the nuts.
Specialist teacher. I remember they had roaches in there. And people wanted to kill the roaches in the house. And he said no. And he would put a big garbage bag with some food in it in the middle of the floor at night. And then he'd get up in the middle of the night and go and close it and ship them outside. Say prayers for the mission, and after a while they stopped.
The Zen monastery that I study at, they have a lot of that. And they refuse, they try and catch them and release them. I don't like living with them. Like they run over all over the place. So I said, I can't sleep where they're running on me. You have to find a room to go. Or else I can't stay here. I'm just not like you. I can't do it.
I have a mosquito that I sleep in. Kissing bugs in the summer, there's no kissing bugs. Or, scorpion, I don't have to think about it. So I put myself in the skin.
Welcome back. Okay. Okay, Buddha nature that requires development. Right, so we've got this inborn Buddha nature, and that's our emptiness. The emptiness of our minds guarantees that we will become a Buddha, that we can become a Buddha. And because they say goodness always wins, we will become a Buddha, or truth always wins, we will. So the emptiness of your mind, your innate Buddha nature, doesn't change. It doesn't get more or less empty. Like emptiness, this is that negativity I think that we talked about, right? Emptiness simply means that it doesn't exist. It's a negative, just doesn't exist. So this Buddha nature that we're going to talk about, the one that needs to be developed, does change. It changes and grows. The parts of you that will create the parts of your enlightened being, your Buddha mind and your Buddha body, which are changeable and which are constantly changing. So one of these things is the seed of an immaculate mind in the mind of an old scroungy mutt, or in your mind. Right? The seed of an immaculate mind exists within your mind right now. And that needs development, right? And a lot of the practices that we talk about are to develop that. Additional examples are the Bodhisattva's direct perception of emptiness, right? It's part of his Buddha nature. All of your perceptions, which can be developed. It's not the emptiness of his mind. It's the part of your mind that will evolve into a Buddha's mind. So another one is the compassion in the heart of a bodhisattva. Right? So your compassion needs to be developed and needs to grow, and it will develop into the compassion of a Buddha. Ultimate compassion for all things. So the compassion in the heart of a bodhisattva is already a pretty advanced state of mind. The Buddhists talk of mind and heart as the same thing, right? So it's already pretty highly developed, and you could say it's definitely going to develop into a Buddha's mind. Right? And then they say any person who has just taken the Bodhisattva vows, right? That's also an example of a Buddha nature that needs to be developed. And then they say there are certain people, like people that have just taken the Bodhisattva vows, right? So certain people can be considered Buddha nature, which is to be developed. It's an interesting concept. So scriptures give examples of baby bodhisattvas, which I think is what we just said, right? Baby bodhisattvas are those who have taken the bodhisattva vows, right? And those vows are going to cause their mind to develop into a Buddha. So people who have just reached bodhisattvahood, I wonder if that means people who then have had that ultimate experience of bodhicitta. They've achieved real bodhicitta, which is a very, very advanced state of
So
mind.
emptiness directly. Just so emptiness directly.
Is that the same thing?
To achieve a real bodhicitta, yeah.
Bodhicitta? Can you not achieve bodhicitta without seeing the direct perception of emptiness?
A real bodhicitta, no. We can have a sugar cane,
So that's something I'm not totally sure of, whether bodhicitta is then equivalent to the direct perception of emptiness, I think is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yes. I'm not sure about that.
Sorry. Or interaction.
So again, that seed, that very subtle seed, even in a scroungy mutt's mind, is Buddha nature also, is to be considered Buddha nature. So Buddha nature is summed up by this phrase. Buddha nature is emptiness itself and something which is going to turn into a Buddha. Okay. So we started all of this by talking about not getting discouraged, right? So this whole idea that you have Buddha nature, these two different kinds of Buddha nature, should help you not to get discouraged. The fact that you have this inborn Buddha nature, the emptiness of your being, which means that you can change and develop if you just plant the right seeds to do it. And all of those aspects of things of your mind that will turn into a Buddha, right? So the emptiness of your mind and all of those aspects that will turn into a Buddha. Okay, and they say that because you have Buddha nature, right, which means that you have this ability to turn into a Buddha, and because the number of good deeds that you have to do in order to do that, in order to make this transition, is limited. It's very large, but it is a limited amount, right? There's nothing to say that you can't get there. Right? You can achieve it. If it were unlimited, you keep going forever, right? And maybe never achieve it, but it isn't unlimited. It is limited. There is a point where you will achieve it, right? Where you will have amassed enough merit and wisdom that your mind and your body will turn into the mind and the body of a Buddha. Then we're going to switch back to this whole idea that to become a great bodhisattva, to become a Buddha, we might, at some point, we hear stories about tearing out eyeballs to give to somebody, you know, that cutting off our flesh to feed the tigress or to feed somebody, you know. And we might think, wow, it makes me really nervous to think that, you know, where I'm going to be expected to do those kinds of things, you know, because really, I don't think I'm ever going to get there, you know, where I'm willing to do that, right? So there's a contemplation, another contemplation, if you'll close your eyes. This one's called The Courage of No Choice. Now suppose you say, but I feel a fear for the act of having to give away my arms and my legs and such. But it's nothing more than ignorance, a failure to judge what's really heavy or light that makes you afraid. Over countless millions of eons, infinite times, your body's been sliced or stabbed or scorched with fire or chopped up into pieces. Yet still you were not able then to reach enlightenment. Now this requires us believing in the fact that we have lived for eons and eons and eons, and that if that's true, we've probably gone through every kind of experience possible, you know. We've seen or heard of so many different experiences in this life. You know, we've been hurt, we've had bicycle accidents or car accidents. Supposedly in all these eons, we've had every experience that is possible, you know. We've been stabbed, we've stabbed other people, we've been in wars, we've been shot, you know. We've created that harm for other people. You know, maybe we've been in the hell realms and experienced those kinds of things. And all of that suffering was done for nothing, you know, was done out of ignorance and out of fear. And we had no idea that we could do anything else. So now that we have this information, which may be true, and we can begin to work towards making our lives better and better and better, why should we be afraid of, you know, the many sufferings that we might come upon? Maybe staying up all night to serve our teacher or something, you know. Even if at some point we had to slice off our flesh and hand it to someone, that's minute suffering compared to what we've been through in all of these eons of time. And all of that was for nothing. It was just part of the cycle that kept us going and going and going and going, you know. And now we have the opportunity to end that cycle, to bring an end to that suffering. So what would be too big a price for that? You know, what would you be willing to give if you could stop your own suffering and the suffering of everyone in the world? You know, what would you be willing to give if you could end all the wars forever? You know, if you thought that were possible, how much would you be willing to give to do that? You know? So Master Shantideva says, you have just failed to analyze this question very clearly, and you're afraid out of ignorance and nothing more. Right? If you really look at it, you know, if you use those arguments that I just gave you, maybe it begins to make a little bit of sense. Why is it wrong to fear spiritual hardships, such as giving away one's arms and legs or the like, if one will not have to experience even a fraction of the suffering found in the lower realms? Is it right that we should bear with minor pains in order to destroy a great illness? You know, we go to the dentist and we put up with shots in our mouth and the sound of drilling. You know, we put up with that inconvenience because it's going to stop the toothache. You know, it's going to stop the suffering. We go to the doctor and we let them cut into our bodies, you know, because it's going to stop some greater harm. So would we not be willing to go through some hardships to stop the suffering that we've been going through? So he says, you know, we've been infinite number of people, infinite number of times. We've all been Miss America. We've all been redheads or brunettes. We've been a president or a king, and we've been a pauper or a killer. Because time is infinite and our minds are indestructible. So we've had our arms ripped off and our bodies sliced open and our heads smashed to pieces. So why are we so afraid to do it for a real purpose? Contemplation 13. We're getting there. A blissful path to bliss. A blissful path to bliss. The Supreme Physician does not perform his treatments in a way that's like those other ordinary ones. He cures the massive and infinite ills using a particular kind of technique that's gentle in the extreme. At the beginning, the guide directs us to acts of charity, such as giving vegetables and the like. And once we have grown accustomed to these, then gradually, in good time, we find we can even offer our flesh. So, like Gyaltsab Je said, there are 3 different topics here. How the teacher shows us a method to cure a great illness, which does not require us to experience the slightest bit of pain during the treatment. How the teacher has prohibited us from giving away our body so long as we perceive it as something difficult to do. If you perceive it as difficult, don't do it. Right? And how in the end it will become nothing difficult to give away our own body. You know, if you do the practices and your mind begins to shift, it won't be difficult and it won't be painful.
So I think if you're a Bodhisattva, I don't think you're going to be attached to your body at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to be like, here, have it all.
Yeah, she says that when you become a real Bodhisattva, you won't be attached to your body anyway. It will be like, here, have it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the idea, you know, we start with small things and we don't do things that are too hard. You know, when you train to be an athlete, you start small and you build yourself up to where you can do things. And it's the same with us baby bodhisattvas. You know, we build ourselves up to be able to give our bodies, and it doesn't hurt by the time we do it. Yeah. He says, we'll be so accustomed to giving away things that we will view giving our body as something similar to giving away vegetables. So when you think about what we're being asked to do as bodhisattvas, what is our way of life, you know? It's to make ourselves happy. It's to make other people happy, you know? How difficult is that? You know? We're supposed to be compassionate, right? And as you do it more and more and your life gets better and better, your life becomes much more pleasant. You know, it's not difficult. You know, as you create more and more good karma and things change in that way, it gets easier and it gets more blissful. So he says, when I'm describing bodhisattvas who reach into their eye socket and rip out their eyeballs, you can bet for them it has become a pleasant experience. So it said, the guide has sent us in the beginning to do our acts of giving with vegetables and the like. Give away something small every day. Restrain your anger small every day. And only do what you can without regret. Somehow that reminds me of a story, Pema Chodron. I'm not sure how it relates, but I'm going to tell it because it reminded me. She was working in a high school as a counselor, I think. And there was one student who would come in and talk to her regularly about the troubles that she had with her father. You know, and one day the student came in and said that she had decided to move out of the house, you know, and Pema talked with her about it, and, you know, the student left. And a little while later, the father comes into her office, and she said, he's like this massive football player, right? This huge guy, and he comes in and he is furious and he's screaming at her, how dare you tell my daughter it was okay to do that? You know, how dare you do this? And Pema said that she was like so taken aback by it, but then the teachings came into her mind, and she suddenly, what arose in her mind was, you must love your daughter so much to be so angry about this, you know. And she said this to him. She said, you know, wow, you must really love your daughter to be so angry about this. And he burst into tears and he sat down, and then they were able to have this really beautiful conversation, you know. But she said that had she not been able to like take that anger, and she had practiced so hard, that any fear that she had, you know, turned into this great compassion, and it totally transformed the situation. It was this beautiful story, right? Yeah. So rather than fear in that moment, she was able to experience compassion and do that beautiful thing. So there was a statement, people who get attached to minor pleasures don't achieve great infinite pleasures. So I think you asked me one day about, is it selfish? Is doing some of these things selfish? You know, is the way some of this being taught, is this selfish? And I know it was in relationship to certain teachings and the way they were being taught. You know? So here it says, is it selfish to seek infinite pleasure for yourself? The best thing that you can do for other people is to achieve this ultimate pleasure yourself. You know, if you really want to help people, like how capable are we of doing that right now? You know, most of what we can do are small band-aids. You know, we can go out and we can feed the hungry and feed the poor, and it's really very good to do that, right? But is that going to change their cycle of suffering, even within this life? Or is it going to change that whole cycle of suffering from life to life to life to life? You know, for us to become Buddhas, you know, for us to go through this path and begin to experience this bliss and this ultimate bliss and this ability to see everything all at one time, we are in a position then to do so much more than we are capable of right now. You know, our ability to help other beings just increases exponentially. I think even in the small ways that it has probably for every one of us since we've begun to do these practices, you know. I mean, I had an experience this many years ago of walking into a restaurant and sitting there with someone. It was a coffee shop type place. And the waitress comes up to the table and she's like, well, what is it you want? You know, you could tell she was not in a very good mood. And I looked up at her and I smiled at her and she melted. You know, her mood totally shifted. And it amazed me, you know, it was just incredible to me. A woman came up to me a couple years ago in an airplane. She had been sitting a few seats in front of me, I think, and we had just met eyes a couple of times. And then after I was off the plane and I was sitting there waiting for somebody, she was walking past me and she stopped and said, you know, you have the most compassionate eyes of anyone I have ever seen. You know, and I looked at her, you know, like, huh. And she said, I just, you know, you just do. And then she walked off. You know? So even in little ways like that, I am doing more, I'm helping people more than I ever have in my life before, you know, because my being has changed. So many people that I come in contact with change in beautiful ways around me, you know. And I think that, I mean, did you say to me the other day that you told your mother how people are being so nice to you or something? And she said, of course, you know, you're being nice to people, so it changes, you know. So you're helping people every day, every moment of your life when you walk down the street and you smile at someone, you know. But as you become more and more and more powerful in those ways, you know, as the compassion and the love and the ability to teach, and as that all grows in your being, you know, you can help more and more and more people. You become a Buddha and it's infinite. You know? So is it selfish to do that, to work on this path and to make yourself more and more happy? I don't know. So the kindest thing that you can do for other people is to arrange for your own ultimate bliss. And then he says, you know, don't be embarrassed by it. And don't be, you know, don't feel guilty, because there will be many nasty, hard, late nights serving other people. Don't worry, you'll suffer. You know, it's okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's class.
Oh, much nicer than last week.
Yeah, much nicer than last week's. No death and destruction this time.
I remember it was with DCI 3, something like that, and they came to Geshe-la and asked, it was the main question of last month, why should I get enlightenment?
Yeah.
I don't want, I'm okay. Why should I do it?
So if anyone's online, she said, she went up to her teacher and said, you know, why should I get enlightened? Why should I do this?
And now my student come to me and say, why should I get enlightenment? I say, hi.
Yeah, I know you. Did he give you an answer?
Yes, he gave me unbelievable answer. He said something about, oh, you can help a lot of people if you are Buddha. I said, okay, I can help a lot of people now.
Okay, so
I'm helping all the time.
So you can help a lot of people if you're a Buddha. And she said, but I'm helping a lot of people now all the time.
What's the difference?
What's the difference?
And we talk about it a little bit. And he said, something, I don't remember the connection, but he said, if you are on the path, you can see every person as an angel. And I say,
Wait,
okay.
If you're on the path, you can see every person as an angel.
And I say, okay.
And she says, okay.
Do you see every person as an angel?
Do you see every person as an angel?
And he stand up and stand on his knees behind me.
And he got on his knees behind you.
Yeah.
Which is to say, yes.
Yes. It was unbelievable. I can't
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah.
And my question stopped.
Yeah.
It wasn't by words, it was by soul.
Yeah.
Soul.
Yeah. So what he said wasn't words, it was passed from soul to soul, from heart to heart. So, I think in the beginning I had no particular desire to become enlightened. I didn't really know what it was or understand it, I just wanted to shift some of those patterns in my life wanted to understand them, and I wanted to shift some of those patterns that were being so incredibly painful, But as I got involved in this and practiced it more and more, then it's become more important to me, to make more and more shifts. And then, as you practice, you'll begin to have more and more experiences. There will be realizations that happen along the way, maybe on the way to the big realizations, there will be small ones. And every time that occurs, you'll become more committed, I came up with a couple of different metaphors after a while. One of them was, it was like being in the middle of this tight ball of string, which I didn't even really know I was in the middle of. And then slowly somebody came along and like cut one of the strings. And then I was like, oh, what a relief, wow, that's better. And then maybe a bigger string was cut and it was like more, oh, wow, I can relax more. It's so much nicer, And then the idea that whole ball of string can disappear and you're in this freedom that you didn't know that was possible.
And your small Buddha
that little Buddha.
Yeah. Be free.
Yeah. 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 That our minds are so caught in these little boxes of ways of thinking, and that just smashing those borders and allowing that expansion to happen, You become more and more committed to the path then, because you see what it's doing for you and for everybody around you.
How lucky we are to be here.
Yeah.
To get this teaching.
How lucky we are to be here getting these teachings. Yeah. Any questions? I know I feel like I got kind of stuck at one point talking about emptiness, but maybe it was okay.
No, it's okay. I think it's the main thing you have to really understand.
Yeah, it's
you have to hear it over and over again.
Yeah. She says it's the main thing that you have to understand, and you have to hear it from many different angles to help you. Yeah. Cool. Prayers?
Tashi
Goki Jukshin Meto Cham Mirabin Shin Yempadi Sange Shindu Mikte Owargi Drokunam Nak Shingla Chupasham Iram Uruvatnam Ravakamirtayam
Geva
Di Kewokum Sunam Yeshe Zog Shin, Sunam Yeshe Lejung, Dampar Kuni Topar. And then for each of us to dedicate the goodness that we have just done to something personal in our own lives, our own hearts. So if any of you are actually doing the meditations and the homeworks, the meditation for this class, it says, because of its importance, again review for 15 minutes per day in analytical meditation, the true source from where the things that make us angry really come from, and then the arguments against the other sources. Where does it really come from, and why could it not come from the places we normally think it comes from? So next class, Sunday at 6:30. And I just realized, actually I talked to my daughter today, which was very sweet. I got a missed call from a number, I had no idea what it was. So I called them back and it was my daughter at work. The time in California is now an hour different than it is here. And so Arizona doesn't go into daylight savings time. So almost everybody else in America does. And so our time is off by an hour. So anyone listening online who might live someplace else, make sure it's Arizona time, 6:30 Arizona time.